Fence exhibits 1864 and 65. The 65 was really 1863 if you look at the sticker closely. And so we haven't made appropriate changes to the records, but we've noted it in the record, is my understanding. So with that, I think
Sorry.
no, I'm not looking at you.
Okay.
I'm looking at somebody else and they know who it is. So go ahead. You have a record to make?
Well, before we move off of that, we
Sure.
reviewed it, no objection. I think
Oh, thank you.
that's right. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Judge, we wanted to just see if we could inquire of the court and opposing counsel if the parties are amenable to the idea of expanding the closing argument to 2 hours and 30 minutes.
I was already thinking that was appropriate. So from my perspective, I was going to suggest that.
Very good. That's all we wanted to say. Sounds like we're on board.
Okay, I just didn't think that was enough time for you.
Thank you, Judge.
So with that, can we bring in the jury? And do we have a witness up? Because I don't have him on mine. But is he up there? Okay. That's okay. It's a bandwidth thing. And get in the picture? Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Okay. And no, don't touch it. Don't touch it. I think it's a bandwidth thing. Don't worry about it. As long as it's coming up there, it's all we need. Okay, and everything else is going out.
Judge, on that topic, I'm sorry to bring this up. Have you thought about the sequence of how you wanted to do that as far as lunch breaks, morning breaks, et cetera?
Yep, and I can't make a decision until I know further on
Okay.
where you guys are in terms of when we're done.
Very
So I
good.
have thought about it. I didn't assume, but Aaron assumed that you guys didn't want to break over lunch. But I didn't see a problem with that. But if you guys have a problem with that, then I'll try and adjust that.
Okay. Maybe we can talk about that at the jury instructions conference.
I think that's a good idea. But I have to tell the jury when to come back. So we have to I've got sort of a game plan. I'll talk to you before.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you up at the bench before we release them.
Okay, thank you,
Okay.
Judge. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Very much.
All right, thank you. Everybody rise, please. Okay. Right, we can be seated. Next defense witness.
Defense respectfully calls James Samino, who's appearing remotely.
All right. Mr. Samino, I don't think you can see me, but would you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Bogan.
And Mr. Samino, I don't know if I'm in your frame right now, but I'm Justin Bogan, defense attorney for Mr. Mark Redwine. Can you introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name, please?
Sure. So my name is James Samino. I am and to spell that, it's Simino. I'm the district ranger for the Columbine Ranger District. So the Columbine Ranger District is the area around Durango, Silverton, and Bayfield in the San Juan National Forest. And I got here in July of 2019.
And where are you broadcasting from and what are you doing?
Sure. So I'm broadcasting from Plains, Montana. I'm here working as an agency administrator on a wildfire on the Lolo National Forest.
Is that the reason you're up in Montana instead of down here?
Yeah.
And we need a verbal answer, sir.
Oh, yes, that is. I have an experience level that is the highest for the agency when it comes to wildfires. So when a type 1 incident management team comes in, I'm asked to come be that agency administrator, whether it's on my unit or going out to help other forests.
In your capacity as the district ranger for the National Forest in these parts, are you familiar with grazing leases and grazing practices on National Forest land in the Vallecito area?
Yes, I am.
And are you familiar with what those practices were from 2012 to 2015?
You know, in general, I can tell you the on-off dates and who was permitted and where the permit boundary is. But as to specifics of what happened in that actual season, I don't have that information for you.
And do you have before you a map that lays out the Vallecito allotment for grazing?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And can you explain to the jury first what an allotment is for grazing, and second, what the Vallecito allotment is?
Sure. So in general, we issue term grazing permits to ranchers who want to graze livestock on the national forest. They're 10-year permits. In particular, the Vallecito allotment, acreage-wise, I couldn't tell you exactly what it is. I don't have that sitting here in front of me. But it's a permit that runs from June 21st to October 12th. And the permittee is allowed to put on 346 cow-calf pairs in that period of time. So cow-calf pair being mother cow and the calf with it. And then there's also a portion of that allotment where 50 cow-calf pairs are able to graze another portion, and they move together with that other 346 later in the season.
And Your Honor, at this time, by stipulation, I would seek to admit defense 1925 and publish to the jury.
That's fine. It'll be admitted.
And can I just ask one clarifying question? I do stipulate.
Yes.
That allotment on that map, sir, that's going to be, I assume, accurate back in 2012 as well?
Yeah,
So
the boundary hasn't changed since 2012.
great. Thanks for clarifying that. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Yep.
You can publish.
Thank you. And Mr. Samino, I'm going to ask you to look at your copy of the map. We have a copy here in the courtroom.
Judge, may I?
Yes.
Thank you.
And in the map of the Vallecito allotment, is the allotment.
Hold on, Mr. Johnson, if you want to go out in the audience and off to the side, you can. I just don't want you in the jury. You can go over by the door too, I guess. Okay.
Go ahead, please, the court. Mr. Samino, is the actual allotment where cattle are permitted to graze, is that denoted by kind of a checkered line that's got white and brown checks around it?
Correct. That's the
I need a-
allotment boundary. Yes,
Okay.
that's the allotment boundary.
And safe to say that allotment boundary goes from the southern tip of Alicito Reservoir on the east side of it, up past Tuckerville, and almost to an area called Cave Basin. Does that sound right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then on the west side, the same allotment winds around the Valecito campground and a little bit past the west side of the Valecito Reservoir, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And within that grazing allotment, Runlet Park is included in that area, correct?
That's correct.
So cattle graze in Runlet Park, is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. And you can't speak to the specificities of what every cow pair is doing, but if it's within this checked boundary from June to October, cattle are going to be in that area, safe to say?
Yeah, so at some time during that period, there's the permittee develops a rotation as they move around that allotment. And so they may not be in one place for that whole length of time. They're being moved around that entire allotment. There's different pastures within that allotment.
And you explained briefly a little while ago what a calf pair was. Can you reiterate that for the jury, please?
Sure. A cow-calf pair is just a mother cow and her calf of that year.
So if you have, go ahead.
There are
And-
other times where we allow, so many bulls to go with so many cow-calf pairs as well. But the overall number for that allotment is 346 plus the 50 that graze in East Creek.
Okay. So 346 cow-calf pairs. So that's one mama cow and one calf, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then does the permit also contemplate bulls or the number of bulls? Can you speak to those numbers?
Yeah. In general, it would be reduced from that 346. But in general, we allow like one bull for every 20 cow-calf pair.
Okay. So, and safe to say these numbers of 346 for cow-calf pairs, that was the cap for 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015.
Correct. Yes.
So if we got one mom cow, one baby calf, and some bulls, it sounds like that's in the neighborhood, maybe a little bit north of about 700 cattle in this allotment, correct?
Yes, correct.
And I think you iterated what the permit dates are. Can you reiterate when cattle would be permitted in that allotment during 2012 through 2015, what the start date and what the exit date would be?
Yep. So the date that they can go on the national forest is June 21st. The off date when they are supposed to be removed off the national forest is October 12th.
Nothing further for this witness, Judge.
Any cross?
Just briefly, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Thank you for your service with the fires. I just have a couple of questions for you.
Some of the jurors can't see what you're doing.
Oh, right. So, sir, by November, the cows are all going to be out of here. Is that accurate?
They should. There is an occasion where permittees have a hard time gathering up all their livestock at the end of the season, and there may be a few stragglers on. I can't speak to 2012, 2013, whether it occurred or not. I don't have that information.
Okay. And you talked about a particular person having the allotment for the 346 cows, right?
That's correct.
Who was that?
So the gentleman's name is Kenan Decker.
And did Kenan Decker, did you describe when you sent the map over, kind of the general area where his cattle started on the west side of the reservoir?
I did not. I just,
Mr.
the,
Mr. Johnson?
the map that I sent was just the general map with the allotment boundary on it.
This side of
And
the
then this
map, and then
side.
everybody can see.
Okay, so if I understand you right, sir, at different years, the cows are going to sort of work different areas of this entire allotment. Am I right?
That's correct.
And so on any given year, they might be on the west side of the reservoir?
So I would say every year they are on the west side of that reservoir. It's usually a small number that moves over onto the east side with the rest of the herd.
Okay, and by the east side, do you mean south of, is there a Pine River on the east side?
Yes, there is. Or on the map, it shows as Los Pinos.
Okay, Los Pinos. So Los Pinos cuts kind of across below Runlet Park. Am I right?
That's correct.
And then is it a typical pattern for the cows to come from the east side, or I'm sorry, from the west side over to the east side by Pinos River?
I think they come in off of East Creek, and then I don't know exactly where into the allotment they group up with a bigger herd.
Okay.
And it could vary from year to year based on conditions out there, whether there's water, whether there's enough forage, whether they've changed their rotation for the year. Sometimes permittees will move them into different parts of the allotments at different times of the year based on, a change every year.
Okay. So we know that they use that west side and probably that east side, and then sometimes they use Runlet Park as well, I assume?
Correct.
But on any given year, at any given time, we don't know which areas here that they are, like, for example, 2013, 2014?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I don't have any more questions.
Okay, redirect, hold on. Just leave it on.
Based upon your experience and your knowledge about the Vallecito allotment for grazing, would it be uncommon for people to see cattle in Runlet Park in 2015?
So my experience with that allotment is the last 2 years. So I think I can speak to that. It would just be conjecture in 2015 because I have no information about it. But I think based on the 2 years where I've seen animals, we talked with a permittee this spring, and they do use Runlet Park. What time of year and the total numbers I couldn't tell you, but it does get used, and people would
Nothing
see them
further,
there.
Judge. I'm sorry, nothing further, Judge.
Okay, any questions from the jury? All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Samino. You are excused and appreciate all the effort to testify.
Thank you.
We're waiting.
Becca, you'll let me know? All right. Doing one screws up the other, so we gotta. We're good? Okay, we're good. So, next defense witness?
Got a defense recalls. He's called once by the prosecution, Tom Cowing.
All right.
And given that he's associated with an adverse party, we'd request to ask him leading questions. I think that will also expedite matters.
I think that's provided for by rule.
Judge, and may I comment on that?
You may.
I do think if it becomes a situation where he's hostile, defense can resort to leading questions, but he's an investigator and he's being called by the defense. So until that happens, it'd be the people's position. It shouldn't be leading questions. Now, if it's impeachment, I think that's a little different too.
That's not what the rule says. Come on up, Mr. Kelly. My ruling stands. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm in a penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Have a seat. And have the microphone pointed towards you, Mr. Moran.
Understood. Thank you, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Good morning. Morning. Investigator Cowing, will you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
Yes. First name Tom, last name Cowing, Cowing.
Investigator Cowing, I want to start with the interview you did with Angela Lee on November 20th, 2012. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do you recall that you committed what was discussed on that day to writing in a report from November 20th, 2012?
Yes.
And in your report, after briefly speaking with Ms. Lee, you record that she was absolutely sure she saw Dylan Redwine on November 19th, 2012. Is that right?
Yes.
And you also learned on that day that when she'd seen Dylan, she believed it to have been at 2 o'clock. Is that right?
Yes.
And that she said that happened in the vicinity of a location called Vallecito Market. Is that right?
Correct.
She spotted Dylan walking northbound, she believes, and she thought that was 2 to 3 blocks north of Vallecito Market.
Correct.
The individual she saw that she thought was Dylan, she said that child was wearing a backpack. Is that right?
Yes.
And she said that child was accompanied, well, she wasn't saying child, I guess she was saying that teen was accompanied by another teen male his age. Is that right?
Correct.
She said that teen male had a backpack too. Is that right?
Yes.
She also said that he had dark hair, correct?
Correct.
She went on to say that she was, quote at least from your report, positive that who she saw was Dylan Redwine.
Yes.
And she was positive she saw Dylan Redwine because she had delivered mail to his father's home on County Road 500, right?
Yes.
She also included in her description of being positive that she had been delivering mail to that home for a long time.
Correct.
She was absolutely sure because she said she was accustomed to seeing Dylan at the residence.
Mr. Johnson?
It's all right, Judge. It's a different question. I just don't want to hear the same questions over and over.
Can you answer that, please?
Yes.
And she said she was absolutely sure because she knows what he looks like.
Correct.
She mentioned that she looked at them. Is that right?
Yes.
And they looked at her.
Correct.
She mentioned that she did not wave to them. Is that right?
Yes.
And they did not wave to her.
Correct.
What she described in observing this teen, she said she was sure was Dylan, was that she had to wait a short time for them to walk past her vehicle.
Correct.
And she said she had to wait for them, and she looked at them before she could pull back out onto the road.
Correct.
Are you aware that as time passed, she became less sure of her identification?
Yes.
And that ultimately there was a point where she indicated a diminished willingness to continue interacting with law enforcement?
Yes.
I beg your pardon if you mentioned this, but she did mention that she knew what Dylan looked like, right?
Objection has been answered.
Been asked and answered, Mr.
Beg your pardon. I want to switch gears here a little bit now. You participated in response to Mr. Redwine's house on November 20th, 2012. Is that right?
Yes.
You went in his house to look through the house on November 20th, 2012, and to interact with him. Is that right?
Yes.
On that occasion, you conducted a careful search because law enforcement knows that occasionally kids who have not returned home are in fact in the home hiding. Is that right?
Correct.
Your search was so thorough that you looked in bins. Is that right? B-I-N-S for the record.
Yes.
You looked at the vacuum filter in the vacuum. Is that right?
Yes.
You looked in the laundry. Is that right?
Yes.
And had there been anything in those locations that suggested a major bloodletting, a dismemberment, you would have collected that evidence at that time. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
You wrote at that time that on November 20th in Mr. Redwine's house, you did not see anything suspicious.
Correct.
Do you recall at around that time that you looked at Dylan Redwine's Facebook
Yes.
and you observed that he had not posted anything on Facebook for several days?
Correct.
In the days between November 20th and 21st to November 29th, you had lots of phone calls. Is that fair?
Yes.
Objection or relevance.
I'm going to let it see where it goes. You may be right. I don't know. Go ahead.
A lot of those calls were from psychics. Is that right?
Correct.
People telling you that they'd had visions of where.
Haven't we heard this already? I mean, is this something new?
I do believe that this information has been provided. It was curtailed because of the scope of direct examination. I'm happy to move on. I don't know that we need to reiterate this.
Thank you.
In too much detail. On November the 30th, there was some brief mention of this, I think a week or 2 weeks ago, but that Mr. Redwine showed up and gave you his computers. Is that right?
Objection, this whole line's been done.
I think that's been done too.
I'll move on from that, but I just want to, well, I think the photographs of Mr. Redwine were mentioned too. With respect to follow-up on tips, one psychic tip took you to New Mexico. Is that right?
Correct.
Switching gears here a little bit, you mentioned the Vicedo Country Market that's near where Angela Lee thought she'd seen Dylan Redwine. Is that right?
Yes.
At that market, there was an employee by the name of Judy Sundblom. Do you recall her?
Yes.
Objection of relevance, and we may need to approach Judge.
Yeah, why don't you come on up? Go ahead.
Switching gears here, sir. You, during the pendency of the investigation, also had an opportunity to interview Corey Redwine. Is that right?
Yes.
And do you recall that he told you he did not bleed in the living room at one point?
Yeah. I do believe, yes, I can read the report.
Okay, I didn't hear the answer.
If I could refresh my memory.
Yes.
What page, counsel?
Let me know if that refreshes your recollection.
Yes.
So what I was referring you to, I think, was that he didn't recall Dylan bleeding in the living room. Is that what you were just refreshed on?
Yes.
But in fact, and I beg your pardon, Corey does say that he did bleed while he was at his dad's house. He's hiking in the woods behind his dad's house. He cut his finger.
Corey, yes.
And he remembers that he had to bandage the cut.
Correct.
And he also recalled an occasion where he vomited at his father's house.
I don't recall.
An approach.
Fiction or
What, I'm sorry, would it refresh your recollection?
Well, if it's a relevant objection, I'm not going to go.
I mean, there's multiple objections. It's already been covered. I don't think it's impeachment of anything.
It's not impeachment.
I'd forgotten he acknowledged that. I'll move on. Lastly, sir, there was an occasion in apparently approximately April of 2013 where law enforcement seized Mr. Redwine's Dodge pickup truck. Do you recall that? If I said 2014, I apologize. I think it was 2013.
February 5th, 2014, is that what you're referring to?
The event where law enforcement seized his Dodge pickup truck, and there was some discussion about whether the battery had been replaced in it. Do you recall that?
Yes.
When was the truck seized?
I know of the seizure on February 5th of 2013.
And
Or, correction, 2014.
the condition of the battery in the Dodge stood out to law enforcement. Is that right?
Yes.
And the reason it stood out was because law enforcement had a notion that the battery had been replaced in that Dodge based on something Mr. Redwine had said. Is that right?
Correct.
And then you went back and reviewed the recording and learned that what Mr. Redwine was in fact talking about was the battery in the ATV. Is that right?
Correct.
So somewhere in approximately April of 2013, you learned that he had replaced that battery for the four-wheeler.
Correct.
Moment, please. Thank you, sir. I think the prosecutor will have some questions.
Go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Investigator Cowing, let me start with the conversation with Corey Redwine. So you recall what counsel was just asking you about the discussion with Corey about whether he bled in the living room?
Yes.
And the purpose of this conversation was to determine, because there had been blood in the living room, whose it would be.
Correct.
And Corey wasn't told why you were going to ask him that question. He was simply asked to provide additional information that could be compared against the evidence.
Yes.
And Mr. Redwine was cooperative and gave you the only example he could think of, right?
Yes.
And specifically what he said was, when you asked him if he recalled bleeding in Mark's home while he was there, he remembered hiking in the woods behind his father's house last spring, recalled cutting his finger, but the wound was superficial and not bleeding profusely. Is that what he said?
Yes.
Okay. And he remembered showering after taking the hike and putting a bandage on the cut, right?
Correct.
He did not remember bleeding in the living room at any time.
Correct.
Thank you. With regard to Angela Lee, let's talk about that because you were asked quite a few questions on that topic. So you're aware of the overall investigation as one of the primary investigators, right?
Yes,
And were you assigned initially to call Angela Lee back after a tip came in?
yes,
And is this one of roughly 1,000 tips in the case?
it is.
A lot of tips about sightings of Dylan in the case?
Yes,
And on this particular case, when Angela Lee told you that she was certain that she had seen Dylan, was that on a phone call to her?
yes,
Was that a relatively brief phone call?
yes,
And was someone else assigned to follow up with this one tip out of all those tips?
yes,
All right. And when she reported that to you, one of the questions you weren't asked was, throughout the entirety of the investigation, is this the only 2 kids she reported seeing that day?
yes,
So there weren't multiple sets of 2 kids walking together that she'd seen?
correct.
Just this one time north of the market when she thought she saw Dylan?
Yes,
Now, that tip was ultimately assigned to Tanya Goldbright, at least initially, right?
correct.
And Ms. Lee was interviewed multiple times on this topic, am I right?
Yes,
As early as November 24th, she was interviewed by Tanya in more detail in person about that tip, right?
Correct.
And as early on as that, November 24th, the first in-person interview, she was clear it was about 70% sure she'd seen Dylan.
Objection, this requires testimony of another individual hearsay.
Your response?
Judge, I'm just laying out the entirety of the statements in the investigation. I think that Investigator Cowing's aware as one of the primary investigators who knew of this tip, so that's why I'm asking further. I'd note she's already testified in court as to this content.
I'm going to allow this question to go forward for the sole purpose as to when it was established that Angela Lee was not 100% sure about her identification. You're talking November 24th of 2012?
Yes, Your Honor.
And that's the only reason you can consider this, ladies and gentlemen. Go ahead.
Your Honor, yes, I'm sorry that this will appear as quibbling, but I believe that to be the truth of the matter, and that would be the primary basis for excluding this statement without the proper witness. So
I understand that, and that's why I'm limiting what it can come in for. It is a relevant issue as to whether she changed her mind, whether or not there's things misheard, and I can go on and explain it. I don't want to any further than that. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. So just with regard to that, that was, I guess, 3 or 4 days, 4 days later, right there within 5 days of the sighting, she was already saying that in the first in-person interview.
yes,
In that interview, the purpose of the investigation in that interview was actually to show her pictures of all of Dylan's friends on Facebook, right?
correct.
And the purpose of that was because you were taking that tip very seriously, that Dylan at that point could be alive and there could be one of his friends out there that had seen him.
Correct.
And only 5 days after he went missing, that could lead you to Dylan, right?
Yes,
But she was unable to identify any of them, which was consistent with your investigation overall, right?
Your Honor, objection to inquiring any further about what she's seeing or believing.
I'm going to allow this question to go forward. I just testified to anyway, so it really doesn't matter.
So she was unable to identify any of Dylan's friends as being the second child in this instance.
yes,
And then as it went on in the investigation, you did a whole lot of work in trying to figure out if there was anyone who had seen or heard from Dylan on November 19th of 2012, right?
yes,
All right. And after all that work was done, you circled back as an investigative team to Ms. Lee for other options, right?
yes,
And then by March 4th of 2013, there was an interview again with her with Ms. Goldbright.
Correct.
And she was asked again how sure she was, right?
Correct.
And she was asked about how often she'd seen Dylan and how recently, generally. She was asked those types of questions.
yes,
Okay. And I won't ask you the answers, but I just want to place time frames on the things she's already testified to. Does that make sense?
yes,
So those were the topics of the March 4th interview, is how often she saw Dylan and how recently, right?
Correct.
And then she was talked to again on March 6th of 2013 by Tanya Goldbright, right?
correct.
And consistent with all these interviews, she again was asked about how sure she was about having seen Dylan or not seen Dylan, right?
Yes,
And then finally on March 7th, she was interviewed again by Tanya Goldbright, but also Brandon Dyer was there, right?
Correct.
And the purpose of that meeting was to have her go through yearbooks. And at this stage of the investigation, you were looking at other options besides the fact that was Dylan based on all the information you have.
Correct.
And so she was to go through those yearbooks and see if maybe it was a couple of other kids.
Correct.
And then come later on the 7th, there were a couple of kids who had come to law enforcement's attention who weren't in the yearbooks because they were homeschooled, right?
Yes.
And then the law enforcement had reason to believe that those children might be children she should look at photographs of.
Yes.
And then she was finally presented those 2 photographs to look at.
Correct.
And then even on October 19th of 2020, she was again interviewed and asked the same questions about her certainty in seeing Dylan.
Yes.
Is it fair to say that your interview with her over the phone that first time is an outlier in terms of what was explained?
Yes.
I don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Can you redirect or redirect?
Your Honor, thank you.
Okay, any questions from the jury? Okay, looks like we have at least one. Line up, Mr. Johnson, please. Oh, thank you. So, Mr. Cowan, this is a yes or no question or answer? Okay. Were the 2 kids that Angela Lee saw with a question mark behind it, were they interviewed?
Yes.
Okay. And the next question I don't want you to answer, and did they say they saw Angela that day? That would be a hearsay response, which wouldn't comply with the rules of evidence. So we're not going to have a response for that. So any follow-up, Mr. Ray?
Your Honor, thank you.
Just one question, Judge.
Sure.
Investigator Cowing, they were interviewed prior to Angela Lee being shown the photographs and asked about them, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. You can step down, I assume. You're okay with that? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cowan. Next defense witness? Okay. Come on up, Ms. Smith. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes, sir. Thank you. Have a seat.
May it please the court.
Go ahead.
Can you state and spell your last name for the record and the jury, please?
Dan Smith, Smith.
And how are you currently employed, Ms. Smith?
I am the La Plata County Coroner,
And how long have you been doing that for?
in the position of coroner about 10 years, but as a deputy coroner, about 10 more on top of that.
And what are the qualifications one needs in Colorado to be a county coroner?
You have to be a resident of the county, have to have no felonies, and you have to be 21 years old.
What sort of training have you obtained to be the La Plata County coroner?
I am certified through the state as a coroner for the Colorado Coroner Association, and I'm also nationally certified through the American Board of Medial Legal Death Investigators,
What is that?
a national certification.
And were you the county coroner for La Plata County in 2013 and 2015?
Yes, sir.
And how long had you been the coroner in 2013?
Couple of years.
Couple
The
years.
actual coroner,
Yes, ma'am.
couple of years.
Okay. And then in 2015, a couple more years after that?
Correct.
Okay. And can you explain to the jury what the responsibilities are of the county coroner, what you do?
I'm responsible for determining the cause and manner and death of an individual.
And generally, when does that come up? How do you get pulled into those situations where you have to make those determinations?
Whenever I get the call.
And who's supposed to call you?
It depends. Law enforcement usually calls me through dispatch. Sometimes I will get a call through, like the hospice people or an individual that way.
Does the law mandate that when law enforcement comes across a dead body that they are to contact you?
Yes.
And does the law mandate that when law enforcement comes across a dead body, they are to contact you as soon as practicable?
Yes.
And then what are your responsibilities after you've been informed by law enforcement that there's a situation, a body you got to investigate?
Well, it depends on the circumstances, but I don't necessarily have to go to the scene where the body is. It depends on the situation.
Why is that?
That's my determination. I mean, it just depends on the situation.
Right. It's depending on the situation, in your discretion, in your determination, you decide whether or not to go to the scene where a body has been found, if I understand you correctly.
Correct.
And safe to say, according to the law in Colorado and the duties of a coroner, should law enforcement touch or remove a body from a place that they find it before contacting you?
No.
And safe to say, in your discretion, the typical series of events would be law enforcement finds a body, they contact you, they don't touch the body, then you decide whether or not you need to go to the scene and conduct an investigation or not.
Your Honor, I'm going to object on the leading questions here. I know that we're trying to move quickly, but
This is your witness.
Okay. What's the typical practice in your experience in La Plata County when law enforcement finds a body?
They call dispatch for me to respond. And then depending on the situation, whether I respond or not.
And again, that's in your discretion.
Correct.
Turning your attention to this case, were you informed that some of Dylan Redwine's post-cranial remains had been found?
Yes.
And can you describe for the jury what post-cranial is?
The brain. I guess I'm not sure.
No, it's fine. I'll rephrase the question. Do you recall if you were informed whether some femurs, tibia, clavicle were found?
Yes.
Okay. And were you informed where those were found?
Yes.
And do you know how soon you were informed about those findings after they were in fact found?
Soon. I don't know. I can't tell you if it was an hour or 2 hours, but yes, right after they were actually, when law enforcement went up to some bones, they didn't know if they were animal or human, but they said, we are going to go check it out. They brought them down, we had them checked, and yeah, I was there when that happened.
Right. And you're saying that was a couple hours after they were found?
I don't really know. I don't remember.
Do you recall doing an interview with me and my investigator, Mr. Les Lister, and informing us that you got called 2 to 3 days after the remains were found?
No.
We're looking at a transcript of that interview.
No, I
Refresh
don't
your
remember.
recollection.
Could you give us a date?
Yes, I thought I said on May 30th, 2019.
Thank you. Oh. Okay. All right. You ready?
Yes, I am. Do you recall going up to the scene where law enforcement told you the remains were found?
No.
You don't recall going up to Middle Mountain to see where some of the remains were found?
No, I went up to Middle Mountain to the, when I first was informed that there was a possibility someone was missing, I went up to their command center and they showed me the possible area where this individual could be.
And when they showed you the possible area where this individual could be, was that prior to or after the postcranial remains had been found, the
Prior.
femurs and tibia?
Prior.
Okay. And after the remains were found, did you ever go to that area?
No.
Did you ever conduct any investigation of the area where the postcranial remains were found?
No.
Understanding you got the call relatively soon that the postcranial remains had been found, were you informed that that area had been sealed off?
Yes.
And how long was it sealed off for?
Not, I don't know.
Could have been sealed off for a couple hours, could have been sealed off for longer than that, you don't know?
Correct.
Okay. And again, in your discretion, you didn't go there at that
No, I
time,
did not.
right? We need a verbal answer for the record.
I said, no, I did not.
And you really do need to speak up. Bring to the microphone. I don't know if the jury can hear you or not, and I'm close. I'm having trouble.
Okay.
And I know you can talk louder than that. True. Okay.
And you've already testified that you believe you were informed about this first set of remains 2 to 3 hours afterwards, correct?
Approximately. I had to have time to bring them down. Yeah.
And turning your attention again to the conversation you had with Mr. Lister and I on May 30th, 2019, do you recall that for some reason you weren't notified for 2 or 3 days after the discovery?
I don't think that was correct.
Well, that is what you told Mr. Lister and I on May.
Stand that. And
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's correct.
You're not sure what's correct or
2
not?
or 3 days later, because they went up there, they found some bones, they brought them down, and when we met with the anthropologist that confirmed that yes, they were human, I was there when that happened.
Right. But I'm just asking about when you were initially informed. And as you told Mr. Lister and I, it wasn't until 2 to 3 days after they were found. But you've also told this jury it was 2 to 3 hours.
I'm not sure.
Okay. Could have been 2 or 3 hours, could have been 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
But ideally, as the coroner who's got to make these determinations as to cause and manner of death, you like to get this information consistent with Colorado law as soon as possible.
Yep, sure.
And after this first set of remains are found, can you explain to the jury what process you undertook in your investigation to determine cause and manner of death of Dylan Redwine?
We met with the anthropologist, and who confirmed that yes, they were human, and then they were sent off for DNA testing, and it was confirmed to come back as Dylan's remains.
So that's the process you undertook after the first set of remains, have the remains identified as human, have DNA confirm whom they are.
Correct.
Did you partake in any other investigation regarding this first set of remains?
No.
And do you recall, when I'm referring to these first set of remains, how much matter, how many bones we're talking about?
I don't remember.
Now, you talked to the jury, all of us, about what a coroner does, and this is foundational. I'm leading a little bit, as to cause and manner of death. Can you explain to the jury what cause of death means, what manner of death means for a coroner?
The cause of death is...
And I'm going to ask you to lean into the microphone like I am. You're doing great.
Yeah. The cause of death is what happens to cause the death, whether it's a natural death, medical issue, a traffic crash, blunt trauma, whatever. The manners, there are 5 manners of death, and that is natural, accident, suicide, undetermined. There's one more.
Homicide?
Homicide. Yep.
And can you define for the jury what the term homicide means for a coroner, and how, if at all, it differs from how the law defines that?
Homicide for me is the individual died as a result of actions of someone else.
And is that the beginning and the end of that definition?
In the end, it's very short. It's caused by someone else.
Does that mean when the coroner uses the term homicide that she is inferring what motivation, mental process, or why something happened?
No. That's up to law enforcement to determine who and what was the cause. I could have an individual that was in a bank, and someone comes in to rob the bank, and that individual dies from a heart attack. That is a homicide.
Even though the bank robber didn't do anything to the poor person who had the heart attack,
Correct.
they go in, the person has a coronary.
They died because of their action to come in to rob the bank.
So it sounds like it's, though a short definition, a very, very, very inclusive definition.
Yes.
Because it doesn't get into the mental process, motivation, or anything like that, right?
No.
Now, initially, based upon your interactions with the postcranial remains, those bones we've been talking about this morning, you issued an initial pending certificate of death for Dylan Redwine, correct?
Correct.
Permission to approach, Judge.
Yes.
Defense 1917.
Oh, that's my copy.
And without discussing the substance, the words of what's on this document, does defendant's 1917 look like a fair and accurate reproduction and representation of the pending state of Colorado certificate of death that you drafted in this matter?
Yes.
Move to admit, Judge.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Admitted.
And looking at the bottom of the form that you filled out, you actually signed it as well, correct?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And what's the date on this? Or did we not get the date on this document?
I don't. Oh, December 27th, 1919.
Say that one more time.
December 27th, 1919.
How about 2019?
Oh, 2019, correct.
And Judge, this looks like it's a poor quality copy, and I think counsel would probably agree with me, that actually says 2013.
Well, you got to dance with who brought you to the ball. I'll agree to that. I don't think the date's dispositive here, Judge.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Aside that it's in this century.
Mr. Bogan, how much longer are you going to do?
Yeah. 5 to 15, Judge?
Be on the shorter side, please.
By all means. On this pending certificate of death, what did you determine as manner?
Undetermined.
And what did you determine as how injury occurred?
Undetermined.
Now, eventually you issued an official death certificate, correct?
Correct.
Permission to approach with 1918 defense, please, previously.
And Judge, we'll stipulate to the admission of this document.
Okay, 1918 is admitted.
Ms. Smith, was this the first official death certificate for Dylan Redwine?
Yes.
And again, that was issued and signed by you?
Correct.
And where it says manner of death, what was your determination?
My signature's not on here.
Was this the one that got issued by your office?
It probably was one that came through the mortuary.
Okay. And what does it list as manner of death?
Homicide. Oh, no.
Yes.
I don't have my glasses on, so I really can't.
You want to get your glasses?
No, they're out in my truck.
Do you want mine?
Maybe.
It would help. Just don't. That help any? Oh. No?
Okay, manner of death could not be determined,
And cause of death.
undetermined.
Now, eventually, you filed the forms to, quote, correct a Colorado death certificate in this case, correct?
To amend, yes.
I'm sorry, speaking to the microphone?
To amend,
Yes, ma'am.
yeah.
Okay. And you did amend it from undetermined to homicide, right?
Correct.
But explain to the jury whether or not that was a process that you had to grapple with, given the state of evidence.
Definitely.
Explain to the jury why you had to grapple with it.
Well, I had to make sure that what I had or what I knew was the death occurred because of the results of someone else's actions.
And after, when the final death certificate was issued, was that before or after the partial cranium of Dylan Redwine was found?
After, I believe,
And
had to be.
did you ever see the partial cranium?
Yes.
What were those circumstances?
I met with the investigator and the anthropologist at the hospital so we could x-ray the skull. And there were some marks on the skull that we found.
And it's your testimony today that you had the opportunity to see the partial cranium, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you do recall you did talk to myself and my investigator, Mr. Lister, on May 30th, 2019, correct?
I don't remember the date, but yes, I talked to you.
Right. And when we were talking to you about this issue, I asked you, at what point did you become aware a partial cranium had been found? And you said, quite a while later, I never saw that.
Oh, well, I was
And then-
mistaken because I did. We met at the hospital.
And then I asked you, you never saw the cranium? Your answer, no.
I was wrong.
So when you're speaking to Mr. Lister and I, you were wrong in your facts.
Correct.
No further questions, Judge.
All right, we're gonna take a early recess, so we'll start up again at just after 9:30. So everybody rise for the jury. You may need them again. Just- You can go. Yeah. All right, we'll be in recess.
Sorry. Thanks for grabbing me. Stop that video.
Do you have contact information for these people?
We must.
Okay. Right. Thank you for getting that, Mr. Bogan.
I don't have that.
Thank you. You can see the military comes. We'll get Ms. Smith back.
Yes.
Come on back up to the witness stand. And you don't have to stand, I'm just standing up.
531.
Is it already admitted or?
No.
Okay. Did you ever get 526 Hogs CD? Have it marked as we don't have it. Or, no, that's one that just didn't go in. That's right. That's right. Okay. No, I'm not gonna do that. But I'm, you okay with that or not? Okay. I don't have to. I can try and keep it pretty generic. All right. Oh, I was going to. That's not leaking. That's a plus. Everybody ready for the jury test? Okay, be seated. Mr. Champagne.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Smith.
Good morning.
You were aware that Dylan Redwine was missing at the time that all this began, correct?
Correct.
All right. And you were aware that law enforcement was going to be conducting a large-scale search on Middle Mountain June of 2013, is that right?
Yes.
And you actually went up to their incident command that was located up at the gravel pit on Middle Mountain, correct?
Correct.
Now, that was before the remains were found.
Yes.
But you had a chance to see the area, take a look at where they'd be searching, et cetera.
Yes, I did.
And after the bones were found, you testified that, from your understanding, law enforcement didn't know if they were human or if they were animal.
That's true.
And they took the bones down to the forensic anthropologist, right?
Correct.
That was Dr. Dawn Mulhern.
Yes.
You were invited to come over for that meeting.
Yes.
And you were actually present when those bones were identified as human.
Yes.
Okay. And you confirmed that by your observations and her words, correct?
Yes.
One of the people that you consult with, you're not yourself a forensic pathologist, right?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No.
But one of the people that you consulted with on this case was Dr. Kurtzman, right?
Yes.
Okay. And he also made the determination that this was a homicide, correct?
Yes.
You said originally that the death certificate or the pending death certificate that you signed was undetermined, correct?
Yes.
Undetermined as to cause and undetermined as to manner, right?
Yes, sorry.
Okay. And that you modified that or amended it to change it from undetermined as to cause, but homicide as to manner. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If I showed you a copy of that death certificate, would you recognize it?
Yes.
Okay. May I approach with People's Exhibit number 531?
Yes.
Do you recognize that document?
Yes.
Is that the document, the death certificate for Dylan Redwine?
Yes, it is.
Does that show the manner of death as homicide?
Yes, it does.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of the death certificate currently on file relating to this death?
Yes.
Move to admit number 531.
Mr. Bogan?
No objection.
It's admitted.
You talked a little bit about cause and manner. You gave this example about a bank robber, right?
Yes.
And how, although the bank robber may not have actually assaulted or hurt that person, that person had a heart attack and died, right?
Yes.
And you called that a homicide because
Yes.
it was caused by the stress or the anxiety of the event.
That's correct.
And so context is important, right? When you're talking about investigating a death. Is that right?
Yes.
And the cause and the manner.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Did you take into account the context in this case in changing it from undetermined to homicide?
I did.
One moment, please. After the skull was located, you said that you saw it, it was presented to you. Prior to you seeing it, you were aware that they were conducting a search up on Middle Mountain for the skull, correct?
Yes.
Because they had a report from some hikers or something like that, that there was a skull up on the mountain.
Yes, and they were going to go check it out.
And had you spoken with Investigator Ezell about what he should do if in fact he found the skull up on the mountainside?
Yes.
What did you tell him?
That I didn't need to be there. If he thought it was human, then bring it down.
Do you have any concerns about the actions or the behaviors of law enforcement regarding how they handled the bones of the skull in this case?
Absolutely not.
No further questions.
Mr. Bogan?
You said on cross that you've talked to Dr. Kurtzman about this, correct?
Yes.
And you affirmed on cross-examination that Dr. Kurtzman, using that definition of homicide, determined this is a homicide, correct?
We discussed it. Yes.
Right. And what's the date on that final death certificate?
I thought you might need them.
December 27th, 2013.
Say that one more time.
Says
And I'm going to ask you to lean into the microphone.
the date that it was filed.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry. February the 18th, 2014.
2014.
Correct.
And when you made those determinations, when you amended that certificate, you weren't relying on what Dr. Kurtzman told you in his official opinion, correct?
I wasn't relying. I guess I'm not sure what you meant.
Were you relying on Dr. Kurtzman's official opinion about homicide in this case when you filed that?
I took that into consideration. Yeah.
How did you do that if his report wasn't written until 2018?
His report.
His opinion about homicide wasn't rendered to law enforcement in this case until March 2018.
I'm not sure.
Nothing further.
Any questions from the jury? No? This witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
Ms. Smith? Free to go.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yep.
cool.
Mr. Bogan?
Mr. Frederick Crasium.
Okay. Mr. Crasium, if you come up to the witness stand up here, please. And if I could have you raise your right hand before you sit down. Right here? Yeah, just raise your hand. Sure. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the penalty for perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Thank you. Have a seat. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Crasium. Oh, good morning. How you feeling? A little nervous. Okay. May I have you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record? Yes, sir. My name is Freddie Crasium. My father didn't give me a middle name. My last name is spelled C-R-A-C-I-U-M. It stands for Christmas Day. My first name is Freddie. F-R-E-D-D-Y, not I-E. Okay. What do you do for a living, Mr. Crasium? I'm a subcontractor. I'm a caretaker, and I do work for my church on a voluntary basis. And where are you from? I was born in California, raised in the Bible Belt, and happy to say I've been on this side of the earth for about 25 years. Corners area, excuse me. Okay. And how do you know Mr. Redwine? I used to work with him in 2012 when I started in the oil field. And so you met working the oil field, was that for United Pipeline? Yes, sir. How long did you work together? On the job that we worked together was approximately 3 months. And where was that? That was in San Joaquin Valley, Bakersfield, California, sir. How long was the project in California? When I worked on it, it was 3 months, and I think it was going before that, so I really can't tell how long that project was when I worked there. Did you have an opportunity on that project to spend quality time with Mr. Redwine? Yes, sir. And did you have meals together or travel to work sites? Could you let the jury know how it was you came to spend time with him? Do you want me to explain how all your answers are yes. I did travel with him in the truck. I ate meals with him. I sometimes would learn a lot of things from him. And there was a couple times that he saved my life. So I can say that I know him a little bit. I got to know him on a personal basis too. Mr. Crasium, I think you mentioned that this was for United Pipeline. Did United Pipeline have GPS units in the vehicles? Well, they had more than that. They could also tell you how fast you were driving, where you were going. Yes, sir. I want to talk to you about the hours you worked and how folks would look when they came off of a job. How would folks look when they got home from projects like this one you did in Bakersfield, California? Objection relevance?
I can see some relevance to it. So you can answer the question.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, they wouldn't be as snazzy as I am today. When you work in temperature that gets over 100 degrees and you're in the desert and you work sometimes up to 72 hours. For example, the first time I seen Mark, I looked at him, my God, dude, get a shower. Little did I know a week later I'd be looking the same way and feeling the same way.
you're so tired and you put in so many hours, but she's not really looking about putting gel in your head or sometimes even shaving. There's times that I wouldn't even shower. Just tired.
Mr. Crasium, out in the field, it sounds like you're putting in a lot of hours. Can you tell the jury how many hours you put in a week or when you would get breaks?
Yes, sir. For example, by the time Thursday afternoon at lunchtime came in, it was 40 hours. So we look forward to Friday and Saturday because that's when we put the extra hours in. So, and it was 6 days all the time. We had our Sundays off. And when holidays came, we had time to take off on them too. But I would always remember that can't wait till Thursday because need time, that is over 40 hours. But it was always like that. Didn't always work all the time on Saturdays, never on Sundays unless we had to. But we always worked 6 days a week and we worked long hours, never less than 10. I mean, it was a man's job.
Mr. Crasium, is 40 hours significant because afterwards it would be overtime?
Yes, sir. And we love the overtime.
So does overtime get to be a significant source of income?
Yes, sir. Very much so.
If overtime hours aren't properly counted, would it be a good idea to get into the office once you returned home to make sure memories hadn't faded and you were credited for overtime hours?
Well, yes, sir. If you don't turn in your paperwork and you don't turn in your overtime, or the supervisor forget to do it, you can wait on a couple of weeks before you're going to get paid.
Mr. Crasium, was Mr. Redwine responsible for making sure you and other folks on the crew had those hours turned in? Is that his responsibility?
That was one of the many responsibilities he had, yes, sir.
And I switched gears here a little bit. I want to talk to you about whether you had an opportunity to observe whether Mr. Redwine loved and cared for his child, Dylan. Did you ever have any opportunity to observe that?
Yes, sir, a couple times.
Would you tell the jury about one of those occasions where you saw something that made you think that he had love for his child?
Well, of course, we're talking about spring of 2012, so we're talking a few years ago, but a certain couple things stuck out about me. A lot of times we work long hours, we come right back in the truck. Some of us are repaired, supervisors have his own truck. Remember, we had a good day that day. We worked a long day, and sometimes the supervisor, most of the time, would have to be on the job, but sometimes they could leave early if they had to take care of their manners. And I remember that day that Mark had left early, and we had come home after 12, 13 hours, and all the guys parked in the truck, and he had his own certain parking place where he would park. We'd always back into it. We were supposed to back into parking lots, always for safety. Safety was very important. It was number one thing. But I caught him. I snuck up on him. He was looking down at his phone in his truck. I snuck up on him. I think me and Dee were together. I said, "What's that custard?" Well, we called him Custer because he was the head of the minority Indian group. And he was surrounded by Indians.
Objection, Judge. This is turning into a narrative response.
I think it's okay. He's explaining what happened. It's okay at this point.
Sorry, Mr. Champagne.
Okay.
I'll make it short. And the oil field.
And Mr. Crasium, can just make sure you stay close to the microphone, please.
How good would be close? Is this good?
That sounds better.
Okay. I said, D, I'm gonna go check up on Custer. I'm gonna see what he's doing. Looking down in his phone, just not moving. Went over there, tapped on him. It spooked him. He had a little bit of red in his eyes. I said, what's going on? He said, man, I just looked at these pictures. I said, well, what are you looking at? He looked like you're crying. He didn't have tears in his eyes was red. He was emotional. And he showed me pictures of his son playing baseball, sliding to second base, batting. I think he was going to take off on first base too, but I couldn't get a word in with him. He was like, the minute he started talking about it, he's so happy. And He's like it was his pride and joy. And I said, you know what? I have a son almost that same age. Man.
Judge, I'm going to object to hearsay.
This isn't hearsay. It is, but at this point, I think it's a little, I want you to ask some questions.
Sure. Mr. Crasium, what the court, Mr. Champagne, are indicating is that there have to be questions to sort of break up these stories. So I do want to switch gears a little bit. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we are trying to be considerate about time too.
Yes, sir.
Fair to say, without going into all of them, that you have other stories about Mr. Redwine and your observations about the way he cared for his child.
Yes, sir, towards my wife and towards my daughter.
Switching gears here, were there occasions when Mr. Redwine, well, you've described, I think, in an answer to another question that he was your supervisor, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Did you have opportunity to observe him being forgetful as he was your supervisor?
A couple times, yeah.
Objection, relevant? Well, then maybe I don't understand the relevance to that.
I want to approach, if we're going to have any further discussion about that. That's as much as I needed to ask on that issue.
Okay, go ahead. Proceed.
And your answer was a laughing yes, that you had observed that?
Yes, sir, I could tell you why on one occasion.
I think the judge
any further than that.
requiring we move on from that. Yes, sir. In the winter of 2012, early 2013, did you run into Mr. Redwine?
Yes, towards, after Thanksgiving, I think it was. Yes, sir.
Can you describe what his demeanor was, and with peace and respect, briefly?
I don't mean to laugh at this because this is when I seen Mark after Dylan was missing. I seen a man that I didn't know anymore. He didn't look the same. He didn't talk the same. He was totally lifeless, and he was scared.
Mr. Crasium, did he give you flyers?
Yes, sir.
Did you affix those to your vehicle?
Yes, sir. I put 2 of them on, and I passed out a few more. They were pictures of Dylan.
Did he talk to you about searches he'd been a part of?
Yes, I'm going to sustain.
After that encounter with Mr. Redwine, did you lose touch?
I'm sorry?
Did you lose touch with Mr. Redwine after that encounter?
Yes, sir. We were going to try and get together, but I never got in touch with him again.
Were you worried about him?
Very much so, sir. Gravely.
So kind of a dramatic shift here onto another subject, but was there any occasion where you had been discussing with Mr. Redwine buying his truck?
Very relevant. You know, it may be relevant. See what the relevance is. At this point, it's not hearsay. It's just that you talk about buying a truck. That's not hearsay. Go ahead.
Did you, sir?
More than just that, sir.
Were you also going to rent his house and buy a Cedo?
Yes, sir. I was planning to.
And why did you ultimately decide that you didn't want to do that?
Well, the first thing was I had to make enough money, but the second thing is after what you told me, I didn't want to go there.
Okay, and that I'm going to strike. I don't see what the relevance is.
Your Honor, may we approach? Sir, you said that.
Wait.
Okay. Sir, you said you were scared to move to the house in Vallecito?
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury why.
After what me and Mark had talked about when I seen him.
And what were you scared of if you were living in that residence?
Well, the things that we've discussed and the way that he looked when he talked about him,
So vandalism and otherwise occurring at the house?
more than just that, sir.
Understood. Mr. Crayson, that's all I have. I think Mr. Champagne will have some questions for you.
Mr. Champagne?
Thank you.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good, sir. Thank you. How are you, Mr. Champagne?
I'm well.
I'm sorry I couldn't talk to you the night when you called me, but
I appreciate that. Unusual here in the courtroom is that we're not allowed to chat. But we did talk on the phone the other night. Is that right?
yes, sir.
And you said that you preferred to just talk here in court.
Yes, sir. I thought it would be better if the jury had to hear what me and you would talk about instead of just me and you.
Sure,
I think it'd be fair that way. Also with the officer.
And
I
so,
think it's fair to them. They get to hear what we talk about.
sure, I understand that. So you said that Mark Redwine was your supervisor?
Yes, sir. He's also my friend after that.
Okay. He actually gave you a big promotion, right?
Yes, sir. So to speak, yes, sir. I earned that. He didn't give it to me. I earned it.
Fair enough, but you appreciated it.
Well, I hope everybody does when they get a promotion. Yes, sir.
Okay, good. And actually, you gave him, no, strike that. You don't really, I mean, you worked with him for about 3 months, right?
Almost every day, sir, except one of the whole.
Every day. But you never saw him bring Dylan Redwine out to California, did you?
No, sir.
Right. And you never visited the house up in Vallecito while Dylan Redwine was there, did you?
You scared? No.
Yeah. And you've never even met Dylan.
No, but I've seen plenty of pictures about him. I know about him.
Right. But it's a simple question. You never met the child.
Never got to, but I wanted to.
You never saw Mark Redwine and Dylan Redwine interact.
No, sir.
You really, other than what Mark has told you, you really don't know anything about their relationship. Isn't that right?
Well, not just what he told me.
Other than what you saw and what he told you, you don't know anything. You never saw them interact.
That's right. I never seen them together.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Any questions from the jury? Can he be excused?
Yes, thank you.
No objection.
Mr. Grayson, you're free to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next witness?
Your Honor, the defense would call Investigator Gabbard. I may need a second to adjust. No, I'm good.
Want to back up, Investigator Gabbard? It's been a couple weeks, so I'm going to swear you in again. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Speak up.
Your Honor, in the interest of time and based on the previous record made, I'd request to inquire with leading questions.
You may.
Welcome back. Sir, would you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
Joseph Patrick Gabbard, last Gabbard.
I want to talk to you about something that was occurring in the spring of 2013 where you followed Mr. Redwine to New Mexico so his truck could be seized. Do you recall that?
Vaguely.
It was yourself and members of the Plata County Sheriff's Office and the San Juan, New Mexico County Sheriff's Office. You were watching Mr. Redwine travel.
Yes, we will.
And when you seized the truck, you helped Investigator Cowan remove the battery from it. Do you recall that?
Yes, after that was back here.
as you were removing it, the two of you took note of the fact that it was dirty and corroded.
Correct.
Both you and Cowing remembered that Mr. Redwine had mentioned replacing a battery, right?
Correct.
There was some suspicion that, given the state of that battery, that perhaps something he said to you was inaccurate.
I'm sorry.
That battery was so corroded that your perception was, well, he couldn't have switched the battery looking at what you saw.
Correct.
But then ultimately, as you looked into it further and went and reviewed the recording, you determined that Mark had in fact given you accurate information. He replaced the battery in the ATV.
That is correct.
And that was spring 2013?
I believe so, yes.
Do you recall on that occasion that Cowing mentioned to Mr. Redwine that Mr. Redwine could, quote, hang with you guys on searches if he wanted?
I don't recall without looking at my reports.
Or I can pull that out for you.
Yes.
Well, it's buried deeper than I should take any time for that point to find. Do you recall anything along those lines, though, that the searches were being discussed and Mr. Redwine said that he wanted to come out?
Which searches are you talking about?
This would have been spring 2013.
Are you talking about a search for the remains? Are you talking about a search of his house? Just what kind of search?
I see. My impression based on that report was that you were talking about searches in the area.
It could have been.
Just a moment. It's page 4,654, so it's going to take a second to pull it up. So I'll circle back on this. What was the page count? I'm sorry. 4,654. There's also another one from 10,946. May I approach? You may. So I'm going to bring you a transcript. You're not speaking on the page where Mr. Redwine makes the remarks I'm inquiring after, but I want to bring you the first page so you can see that you were here for that interview, according to at least the transcriber, and that you're on some of these pages, but at this point in the conversation, Mr. Redwine's addressing Tom County.
Judge, I guess I'm confused as to the procedure. I get that he's trying to refresh recollection here, but I think it's about a hearsay statement of the defendant. I don't think that's admissible.
I don't think that was the question. Isn't this the question about you can come hang with us and you didn't remember during the search?
That will be the question when I get page 4,654.
What is the question now?
The question now is, do you remember Mr. Redwine reiterating that he wanted to be involved?
I'm going to sustain the objection.
So this would be offered not for the truth of the matter, for the effect on listener, and to, well,
No, it's not. I've made my ruling.
was there another part of the discussion where Mr. Redwine?
Objection, Your Honor.
Well, maybe.
Okay, I mean, the thing is, the way he's asking the question, he's
I
trying.
understand, and you need to get up. I understand.
Right, and so he's trying to insert and testify in front of the jury about what Mr. Redwine said in the form of the question, which is totally improper.
And you shouldn't be doing that. I mean, and if, right now, it sounds like it's gonna be a hearsay response.
It would, and may we approach, I would not like to do this.
All right, thank you. Go ahead.
You recall Mr. Redwine informing you in April of 2013, he did not see a point in going through the lake again.
Could you repeat that?
Sure. This is respecting searches and how they're being conducted. Do you recall that Mr. Redwine was telling you he did not necessarily see a point in going through the lake again?
I don't recall.
Would it refresh your recollection to take a look at a report?
Yes.
Transcript. This is the 10,946 page. This is 4,654. And to get the context for it, you should start at line 23 and read through 37. Commissioner Pilcher. Yes.
Okay.
that sufficient time to refresh your recollection, sir?
Yes.
May I approach?
Yes.
So what Mr. Redwine was saying, or is your memory refreshed on him saying that he did not necessarily see a point in going through the lake again?
Yes.
And were you along on that ride up Middle Mountain towards Bear Creek Trailhead, Bear Eye Park, and then later on to Runlet?
With?
I beg your pardon, thank you. It was in June 2013. It would have been Mr. Redwine, Investigator Goldbright, Investigator Cowan.
I don't recall that one.
If I give you a date, maybe this will reorient you. June 29th, 2013, Investigator Tom Cowan, Investigator Joe Gabbard, and Mark Redwine. Investigator Goldbright would not have been along.
That one I remember.
And that was the day that, did you guys go to a location you're calling Lunch Rock?
I don't recall Lunch Rock.
Okay. But at a minimum, on the day that you were in the vehicle with Mr. Redwine, that you passed a location that was referred to by Sheriff's Office, at least, as the gravel pit.
Yes.
Mr. Redwine was inquiring whether remains had been found near there. Do you recall that?
I,
Can we approach, Judge?
yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Marin. Sir, I've been directed to move on, and it's probably a good idea, in part because you couldn't hear any back feedback.
You can just move on, okay?
May I inquire after the noise in the car?
Why? You're moving on. We're not even gonna get into it.
Understood. Sir, you responded to reports of vandalism reported at Mr. Redwine's house. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Mr. Redwine mentioned concern that people wanted to eliminate him.
We keep having the same problem, Judge. This is the problem.
No, I'm gonna sustain that, Mr. Moran. You've got the vandalism in, you've already got the issue, it's already been in front of the jury, the issue with the, two other ladies. That's your side.
Understood. With that, then, Your Honor, I will cede to the prosecution. Investigator Gabbard, I believe the prosecution will have some questions for you. Thank you, sir.
No questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Any questions from the jury? No? Can, Mr. Gabbard be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next defense witness.
Your Honor, would the defense would call Lieutenant Ezell.
Okay, come on up, Lieutenant Ezell. And I'll swear you in again also. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Have a seat.
Good morning, Lieutenant.
Good morning.
We meet again. Would you spell your last name, state your full name for the record?
Jim Ezell. Last name is Ezzell.
Permission to approach?
Yes.
Sir, are you familiar with the item that I just provided to you?
Yes.
And was what is contained in that bag something that you sent off to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation?
Pursuant to a request, yes.
And the request that you made of CBI pursuant to the request that you got was that the contents of that bag be tested for DNA, right?
Correct.
Are you able to discuss, or can you tell the jury how what's written on that bag gets written on the bag?
In part, yes.
Starting with the top line, will you describe to the jury what's written on there?
In the blank titled agency, the letters LPCSO are written.
So what does that mean?
La Plata County Sheriff's Office.
Is there a GPS coordinate location on there?
There is.
Will you please read that into the record?
North 3728.798. Excuse me. West 107.31.876.
Are the things that are written on that bag, and does that bag then essentially become a document that is prepared in the ordinary scope of the things the sheriff's office does?
Essentially, yes.
Where is this bag with the writing on it gets stored after it is prepared?
This bag gets stored once it's been sealed, yes.
Is it stored in a place that only the evidence technician is supposed to have access to it?
That is correct.
And when that bag is removed from that location, it's supposed to be recorded, is that right?
Yes.
With respect to this particular item, were those procedures followed?
I would assume so, but that's not clear on this bag itself.
Is there another location or another place where data is stored, where that information would be contained that you're familiar with?
Yes, either in reports and or an evidence log.
And as the lieutenant in charge of the investigation and advisory witness in this case, are you familiar with that document?
Familiar with both reports and evidence log, yes.
And with respect to those reports and the property evidence log documents, are they roughly accurate?
I would hope so.
Is it a regular part of La Plata County Sheriff's Office work to keep and maintain records like what's recorded on that bag?
Yes,
And what's recorded on that bag is supposed to be truthful, is that right?
correct.
Your Honor, at this time, we're going to move to admit this bag and its contents.
Did you forget to do something? All right, isn't it supposed to be marked? Do we have a number? Isn't it supposed to be marked before you brought it up?
I am concerned about putting anything on that bag.
There's a way to put things on the bag. What would this number be?
You know, Judge, if it's easier, we can just call it a people's exhibit.
I don't care. Do you want to mark it for me?
People's 527.
Okay. And, well, 527 is admitted.
With that, I don't have any further questions.
Well, can we find out what it is?
It's all on the bag.
Well, I don't know what it is. The jury doesn't know what it is.
I'll address it, Judge. Is
All right, thank you.
that the beer can, sir?
Yes, it's
Okay.
a beer can.
Let's talk about that beer can. So Investigator Patterson, when he was out on the initial search, he gave the same GPS to a central location and went on numerous items, correct?
That's correct.
And then he also,
Objection, hearsay.
I think it's been testified to before, but it is hearsay. So I sustain that objection.
are there numerous items from the same search that are marked with the same GPS coordinates?
Yes,
And there's also an admitted exhibit by Investigator Patterson that actually maps out the real locations of all those items, right?
correct.
Let's talk about packaging. Is there pen writing on that packaging?
Yes, there is.
And is there marker writing on that packaging?
Yes,
Is the pen writing the handwriting of Tanya Goldbright?
yes, it is.
Was she one of the investigators that was there when that item was collected?
Yes,
Then after that item was collected, was something called the field log created?
yes,
Was the field log the real-time information that went into the log sheet of where the items are located?
yes,
Does that field log say 50 yards north, consistent with Goldbright's writing on that packaging?
yes.
What exactly does Goldbright's writing say on that packaging?
50 yards north.
I'm going to object to it being characterized as Goldbright. That's an out-of-court statement for the truth of where it was located.
No. That's two different objections, number one. You're objecting on the authentication as to whether or not he knows her writing, which hasn't been testified to, but it's already gone by you, so I'm going to let that continue. They work in the same unit. I think you can get there. I'm not going to waste your time. And the second one is you're objecting to hearsay on something that you just, are you reading off this exhibit, Mr. Izzo?
Yes, I am.
Okay, which is going to be in front of the jury anyway. It is the evidence. So go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. So there's handwriting on there in pen that you stated you recognize as Investigator Goldbright's. What does it say?
Says 50 yards north of shoe location.
And now Mr. Moran referenced an evidence log, right?
Yes,
You referenced a training log that was created prior to that evidence log, correct?
I'm sorry.
You talked about a training log that's created prior to the evidence log, correct? I'm sorry, field log, is that the term?
Yes, field evidence log.
Okay, so procedurally speaking, when someone bags an item, they write a description on it, and then they call into the field log so that information can be recorded.
Correct.
You've viewed that field log yourself.
I have.
That field log's in discovery and defense counsel has it.
Yes.
What does the field log describe the location of the item as?
Objection, hearsay.
Mr. Root Johnson?
So Judge, counsel suggested the evidence log has hearsay on it that he spoke about. What I'm clarifying is the accuracy of the information on the packaging. I'm not concerned with the truth of the matter asserted, but counsel brought this whole line of questioning up and cited a similar document. I'm clarifying where everything went informationally on the packaging and when.
You can ask him if the two are consistent.
I'm sorry.
You can ask him if the two are consistent with
Okay.
the packaging.
Thank you.
Field log.
Is the writing from Tanya Goldbright, who we know from testimonies out in the field that day, consistent with the information on the field log?
Yes.
Does that GPS coordinate appear on the field log?
It does.
Does it appear on the evidence log?
Yes.
So, do you have a copy of the field log? May I approach, Your Honor?
You may. You want to show it to counsel though?
Yes, it's 12051 in discovery. It's a double-sided, it didn't print really well. I'm just going to do page 1 if that's all right.
I'm gonna want to take a look at that, please.
Let's do the printing. I'm going to mark it as 528, Judge.
All right.
And then I'll show it to counsel. I both showed it to counsel and explained it to counsel. May I approach?
You may.
Investigators out 528 before?
Yes.
Is that the field log?
Yes, this is the field log.
Now, pursuant to your normal procedures, when someone finds something in the field, then they're calling in, and the first thing they're doing is calling in for the field log, right?
Correct.
Does that field log list any GPS for the shoe?
It does not.
Is the GPS location for the shoe consistent with People's 527?
Pardon me. What's your objection? Hearsay. The levels of hearsay necessary, and if this is anything similar to a business record, that foundation's got to be laid, but who's communicating to who's typing it into that report, the admission
As of now, I'm going to sustain the hearsay objection.
Are field logs regularly kept in the ordinary course of business at the sheriff's office when items are found in the field?
Yes.
And are they made at or about the time that the information is collected?
Yes.
And is that a fair and accurate copy of the field log from the Middle Mountain search that involved the beer can that's People's 527?
Yes, it is.
Judge, at this time, pursuant to 8036 of the Colorado Rules of Evidence, I would move to admit People's Exhibit 528 into evidence as a business record.
I'm going to ask the board here,
You may.
who made the call that was recorded on that document?
It would have either been Tanya Galbraith or Dan Patterson.
So you don't know.
They were the two on site when this item was found.
You would agree that there were several other people on site that day as well, correct?
These were the two investigators that would have contacted the command post.
But you would agree that there was, we heard from Sheriff's Office employee named Brenner. He was up there. Is that right?
No relevance for a business record.
I'm not sure what the relevance is either.
So you don't know who made the calls, but you believe it may have been one of two people. Who did they make the call to?
The investigators were assigned to make the calls to the command post,
Who did they call to?
to the individual manning the command post. I believe that would have been Deputy Aaron O'Neill.
But you're not sure about that either.
I'm sure that she was in the command post.
But you're not sure that she's the one who took the call.
Why is that relevant for this?
Because the foundation for this is how it was made. And a business record's got to be made in so substantially the same way that it's the same every single time. And what we're hearing is that it's not occurring in that way.
That's not what we're hearing. Do you have any other questions?
Yes.
Then ask me.
Where was this document kept?
This document was kept in the command post.
Why was it not available when that bag was written on?
It was available by communication with the command post. The bags were in the field. The log was at the command post.
When was the bag written on with GPS coordinates?
I can't tell you exactly when that was written on there.
Fair to say that the standard operating procedure would be to write it when you are at the location.
What's that got to do with the field log?
I'll save it for cross.
Thank you. I'm going to admit the exhibit. I'm going to find that Lieutenant Azell is a person of knowledge about the field log, which was from previous question before this tried to come in. And other than that, Mr. Johnson is the appropriate foundation under 8036.
Thank you, Your Honor. So Lieutenant Azell, the field log comes before the evidence log, right?
Correct.
And you know from the reports in this case that the location written on the bag was primarily written that you had already described to the jury, right?
Yes.
Then at some point, does somebody write more on the bag and seal it and then log it into evidence?
Yes.
And is that when the evidence log is created?
Yes.
Now, if you look at the item that the description of the beer can, that description does not have a GPS coordinate associated with it in the field log, does it?
It does not.
And it does not have a GPS location associated with it in Ms. Goldbright's handwriting.
Correct.
Are there several items next to it that actually have the very same GPS location?
Yes.
And is that then the GPS location that's written on the bag later on at the time that it's logged into property and evidence?
It is.
And then that would have gone into the evidence log?
Correct.
So in terms of the mystery of the beer can's location, the most accurate real-time information is right on that field log?
Yes.
Judge, at this time, I have a couple other topics I'd like to cover with Lieutenant Azell rather than recalling him later. Thank you, Your Honor.
We would object to that procedure. I want to clear up this issue.
You agreed to it in chambers.
I object.
Mr. Bogan, are you withdrawing that agreement? You guys want to come up, please? So you can call him on rebuttal if you want to, Mr. Johnson, for this.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Oh, and I'm sorry, Aaron, I'm the one supposed to be watching this. Okay. You done? Redirect?
Thank you, Your Honor.
I'm assuming you're done. You sat down.
Yes, Your Honor. Based on,
Well, you can call him back.
thank you.
Commissioner Approach.
Yes.
Permission to approach.
Yes.
Approaching with defendant's exhibit 1922. Yeah, just 1922.
My copy.
Lieutenant Zell, what's defendant's exhibit 1922, if you know?
This is an evidence log.
What's the title at the top of this document?
La Plata County Sheriff's Department evidence log.
What is an evidence log?
It's the log that is filled out when items are submitted into evidence.
Does it have somebody's signature on it?
Has Carol Mashner's signature on the bottom.
May I approach?
Yes.
I'll stipulate to admission if counsel wants to make it faster.
You want 1922 in? It's admitted.
People's Exhibit 528. No signature on it, right?
Are you referring to the document that you just took?
Yes, sir.
I don't recall seeing a signature on it.
If you want to double check, I can bring it back up.
I don't recall seeing a signature on it. You can bring it to me if you'd like.
On Defendant's Exhibit 1922, there's an item 213. Do you see that, sir?
Yes.
And that's the banana peel, is that right?
Yes.
And you see that there was a spot on that line where the GPS coordinate location was scratched out.
Objection beyond the scope.
It is beyond the scope as far as I can tell.
This is absolutely within the scope of accurate record keeping.
It's already been admitted. And why would this have anything to do with accurate record keeping? That's something, it's on the exhibit itself.
Sure.
And I think the jury can look at it, and I think you can argue it.
Sir, would you agree that there are bone fragments listed on this document?
Yes, there are.
And those were bone fragments associated with the death of Dylan Redwine.
Objection, this is beyond the scope, Judge.
And why is this within the scope?
Demonstrating that this was of critical importance and the information was recorded accurately.
It's a standard.
On this,
I mean,
I'll limit it strictly to the beer can. Line 215 is the Miller Lite beer can, is that right?
That's correct.
And it has the individual's name on it that found it, is that right?
Patterson, yes.
And there is a GPS location listed after Patterson's name, is that right?
Yes.
And it's the exact same GPS location that you read into the record a moment ago?
Yes.
And it's important in an investigation to identify where things are located. Agreed?
Objection, this has all been covered, and it's cumulative, argumentative.
I think that's a pretty obvious question, and I agree that it's cumulative and argumentative.
I thought so too. I'll leave it at that. Hold on a second. One final question on the locations here. There is no GPS location associated with the black Jordan tennis shoe, correct? permission to approach, I can refresh your recollection. I see you looking. It's item 194.
If he doesn't have it, yeah. And then are you done? Because I want the exhibit back that you're holding. I don't want to lose it. Is it the same? Okay. If it's the same, then it's fine. We don't have a problem with it.
One 194 is the black Jordan tennis shoe, correct?
Correct.
And there's no GPS coordinate listed with that shoe. Is that right?
Not on this document.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Any questions from the jury? Okay, you can step down. Next witness?
Grady King.
Coming up, Mr. King?
Did we have one moment to coordinate an exhibit?
That's fine. Oh, that's perfect. How much time do you need? All right, we'll take a 5-minute recess, ladies and gentlemen. You can stand up, move around, stay away from these people. We're gonna take, yeah, I'm sorry. I assume it's gonna be 5 minutes number.
We're gonna call Mr. King. Yeah, yeah. Mr. Joey? Please are high. Well, we need counsel. All right, we'll wait. We're gonna go on the record, Mr. Moran, so if you want to talk to your witness, go outside. So,
Mr. Redwine, you remember, and I don't remember when it was, but we talked to you about your right to testify and what all that meant. And can you get by the microphone just so, and I'll get by the microphone too, so it gets picked up. Have you had a chance to talk to your attorneys about your right to testify and whether or not you want to do that?
I have in the past, yes.
And have you had enough time to make a decision?
Yes.
Do you have any questions of me as to what your rights are?
No, Your Honor.
Did you understand the rights when I explained them to you?
I did, Your Honor.
Are you under the influence of anything today?
No, I am not.
Would you let me know what you've decided, whether or not to testify?
You have 1 second with my client.
You can, if you want to talk, that's fine.
Thank you, Judge. We're ready to proceed.
Okay. So, Mr. Redwine, you have made that decision?
I have, Your Honor.
And what have you decided?
I've decided not to testify, Your Honor.
Okay, and is this your decision?
Yes, it is.
And I assume that you are not under the influence of alcohol or drugs?
I am not.
And nobody's pressured you into this decision?
Well, they have not.
Okay. I'm going to find that this is a knowing, voluntary, and intentional decision not to testify. The jury will be instructed appropriately in terms of not to be able to use that, the fact you did not testify against you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Oh, they're here. No, we're right to the jury. Okay, we can be seated. So, you ready, Mr. Moran?
Defense will call.
Come on up, Mr. King. Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you. Have a seat.
Yeah, approach it.
Sure.
I want to just clear this.
Yeah, that's fine.
Good morning, Mr. King.
Morning.
Would you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
My name is Grady King, K-I-N-G.
Mr. King, who do you work for?
I'm employed as a investigator with Defense Counsel, your office.
And where'd you grow up?
I was born here in Durango.
How long have you been an investigator with our office?
A little over 10 years.
And did you have occasion to do some work for Mr. Redwine on this case?
Yes, sir, I did.
You've been present through some portions of the trial as advisory counsel, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And we'll discuss this a little more in a moment, but you did create an exhibit that we have emailed to Mr. Doherty that demonstrates the location of things in a Google Earth map, I guess they call it.
That's correct, yes.
Is it better to call it a flyover?
Flyover GPS map, yes.
Before we get there, I just want to discuss some of the things that you've observed in your work on this case, starting with whether or not you've been up to Runlet Park. Have you?
I have, yes.
And when you were at Runlet Park, did you make your way to the GPS location disclosed to us as the locations where Dylan Redwine's skull was recovered?
I did, yes.
While you were in that area, did you observe that there was any livestock?
I did not observe actual livestock when I was up there.
Anything to suggest that that was a grazing area as was described by Mr. Samino this morning?
Yes, there were cow patties throughout the region. There were some bones that appeared to be from cattle in the Reynolds Park area.
That's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. Will you describe for the jury where you were observing cow bones?
The main area that I observed the bones would be in the area coming down from the road through Reynolds Park before you reach the tree line where the cranium was recovered.
And was it your observation that,
Mr. Doherty?
Your Honor, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt. If we could just get a date or dates that we're referring to here, please.
thank you for the reminder. What were approximately the dates?
I don't recall off the top of my head the exact date I did that.
Would it refresh your recollection to the report?
Yes.
Is it the July 14th report that would help? I think it is. Commissioner Report.
Yes. Do you have a copy of this? Do you need to see it?
I do not have a copy, and I would like to see it, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right.
Let me know if, after reviewing this, it refreshes your recollection when you went up there.
Yes, it does.
What's that?
It was on October 23rd, 2020.
And how come you didn't go up there in November 2012? Had you been appointed to this case yet?
No, I was not working on this case at that time.
Was it your impression based on the bones that you were seeing that there were more than one cow that died up there, or that the bones were up there?
Yes, there were, based on the amount of bones that I observed, I would say that there were multiple cattle that had died in that region.
And switching gears here, just to make sure the jury's got ideas as to drive times, did you drive from Mr. Redwine's house to remain recovery site number 1?
I did, yes.
And did you time that?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury approximately how long it would take to get from his house up to remain site 1?
May I reference my report?
You may.
So the drive time from Mr. Mark Redwine's house to the first recovery site was 43 minutes and 24 seconds.
Did you have further occasion to figure out how long it takes to get from remain site 1 to the second remain site up at Run the Park?
And I apologize. I just realized that was the wrong time frame. It was 28 minutes and 26 seconds to the first minute.
I see. What was the time from that location up to Run-Let Park?
After reaching the first site, going up to Run the Park, that was the 43 minutes.
43 minutes from Mark's house.
Correct.
Were you present in the courtroom when there was some drone footage played by the prosecution?
Yes.
Did it depict an area that you're familiar with?
Yes.
Have you had an opportunity to recreate in that area?
Recreate and conduct work in that area, yes.
Would you say that you're familiar with the area?
Yes.
As the drone flew, were you able to observe it, take into view with its video recording equipment, some clips.
Yes,
Had that drone flown from Mr. Redwine's house and not made any turns to the left, would the terrain have not had as many clips?
yes, that's correct.
With respect to those cliffs that are to the north of the remain site?
I would say the cliffs I'm referring to are directly downhill into the west of the recovery site.
Okay. So then to the east would be where the climber trail is that right? Let me ask it this way. Is there terrain that was not captured in the drone footage that is not as cliffed out?
Yes,
And that terrain would be from Mark's house to the east.
that's correct, yes.
And from the remain site to the south.
Correct.
And is that area flatter and more of a plateau than the area where there are cliffs?
Yes.
Did you make a map of the area using information that was provided to us by the prosecution?
I did, yes.
Will you describe to the jury how you made that map?
Basically, I received a report from Investigator Heidel that contained GPS coordinates for certain items. You can basically just input those GPS coordinates into Google Earth and create a pin at that location, mark the pin. That's basically what I did.
Did you include any other coordinates in that map?
I did. I also included coordinates for the canine Molly search that was conducted in that area.
So were you present when Karen Corcoran Gumming, the handler of that dog, testified and gave a list that was introduced into evidence of GPS coordinates?
Yes.
And did you use those GPS coordinates to input into that Google Earth?
I did, yes.
And is what Mr. Bogan got on the computer here something you looked at and you know that this is the map that's created?
Yes, I provided that to him.
We provided a copy to Mr. Doherty. He's not had a lot of time with it, but at this point, I'd ask to admit it and see permission to publish
Number on it?
I don't have a number on it.
And do we have a hard copy?
I do not have a hard copy.
Well, those are two things that we need. Why don't you pick a number, and you're gonna have to get us a hard copy for the record and for the jury.
Understood.
And when can we have that hard copy in color? Tonight? Tomorrow?
12:15.
All right, thank you. So what's the number?
12:59.
Counsel? Yes, it was. I'm sorry, I thought somebody's talking to me. Mr. Doherty?
Thank you, and I didn't want to,
No, I appreciate that.
yes. The people will request more information be elicited from the witness about the foundation for the exhibit, how the witness put the exhibit together before I can make a decision on whether to object or not to its submission.
Mr. King, there are some red pins in this Google Earth document, this map. What are the red pins?
I believe the red pins are the indications from Canine Molly that were provided.
And those GPS coordinates that you used to create the red pins came from a document that has been admitted into evidence?
Yes.
What are the blue pins?
The blue pins are GPS coordinates I obtained from the report I was provided, authored by Investigator Heidel.
Was that report in a chart?
Yes.
And was that provided here in the courthouse by Mr. Heidel, who is not sitting here for a change?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And so it came from the prosecution team?
Yes.
And was that in response to our request to understand how he created his map?
Yes, that's correct.
Have you added any additional pins aside from the ones that Mr. Heidel created on that map?
No, sir.
So maps that we're asking the court to allow us to show has pins that were in a map that was used by the prosecution and Investigator Heidel, is that right?
Yes.
And then the only addition to that map is that we added red pins to indicate locations where canine dog handler Karen Corcoran-Gumming said her dog did final trained response.
Yeah, basically I created the GPS coordinates that I obtained from Investigator Heidel's report. I input into Google Earth and it's basically a single layer. I created a separate layer for the canine indications. And the way that is displayed is they're displayed together with different color-coded pins.
Move to admit 1259.
Mr. Doherty? May I ask a question to you? So just to be clear, Mr. King, it sounds as though the blue pin coordinates you obtained from Investigator Heidel's report, is that right?
Correct, yes.
And for the red pin coordinates, I just want to make sure I'm clear. Did you take those coordinates from the document that the prosecution has previously submitted into evidence with the court's approval?
I believe, sir. I'm honestly not sure if it has been admitted as evidence. I know that my office received that information through discovery.
I understand. I'm just trying to figure out where the red pin coordinates came from. Do you recall what document you looked at for that?
It was one of the reports, I believe, authored by Karen Corcoran.
And I know you've been in and out of the courtroom through the trial, so if you missed this, just let me know. But earlier in the trial, there was a prosecution exhibit introduced and provided to the jury with pins showing the canine responses on the location, as well as the recovery of evidence from the location. Do you recall that?
I honestly don't recall that.
Do you know if it's the same GPS coordinates that were used to put together that same exhibit? Because if so, then
I believe so, yes.
may I approach her?
Yes. And I believe the number is 518, 519, 520 in that range, according to my notes.
Well, as that demonstrated, we've had a lot of exhibits introduced in this long trial, and our court reporter is indispensable. But what I wanted to show you was exhibit.
Chief Judge, now, would you please?
What's that, Your Honor? Oh, and the Chief Judge, yes.
No. Oh, your Chief Judge.
Oh,
about
tell
the
our
recorder.
Chief Judge. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor. 520 in evidence, the people introduced it, and whether or not you were in the courtroom when it was introduced. So I want to show it to you, because if we're talking about the same coordinates, then I'm not going to, of course, object to the admission. I just want to make sure that the coordinates you used in putting together the exhibit that the defense is asking the court to admit are the same coordinates that we've been using with previously admitted exhibits. If not, then I would have additional inquiry.
Yes, sir, this appears to be the same.
Oh, great. Your Honor, no objection from the people. Thank you, Mr. King.
1259 is submitted. Yes.
The other part, just to seal this up so that nobody wonders why this weird exhibit is in here, but those are the other coordinates, right?
Yes.
So
Put on the number.
1160, Defense Exhibit 1160, Karen Corcoran acknowledged that these were the GPS locations that her dog alerted at. You input those, making the red pins,
Yes.
and the blue pins are Chuck Heidel. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Yes.
So, based on your familiarity with the area and the creation, were you able to tell how far the closest that dog got to any place where something was recovered?
There's a couple pins that a red and a blue pin that appear relatively close.
So let's talk about the ones that are the closest. They're approximately in the center of the image here.
Yeah.
What's your best guess, having been up there, as to how far apart they are?
So I measured that distance in Google Earth and Google Maps, and it was about 20 feet. That's about what I would estimate just being up there as well.
And could I have you zoom out a little bit? You're under permission to approach.
Yes.
So the area I was being directionally challenged in describing would be this direction, right? But this is the area that's flattened out as you move south.
Correct. It does appear to flatten out to the south there.
And so then Mr. Redwine's house would also be to the south.
A little to the south, yes.
And then
Yes.
so this area is not as clipped out as the drone footage we saw where the drone flies that deep.
Yes, the cliffs directly to the west are pretty large cliffs. There are cliff bands to the south, but not nearly as big as the ones directly to the west.
And does your familiarity with the area come from rock climbing and spending time in this area, especially with the case of the west?
Yes.
Mr. King, that's it. Thank you. That's all I have for direct, and still have some questions.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Doherty, when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning, sir.
Morning.
You're an investigator working on behalf of the defense, am I right?
That's correct, yes.
And I believe you shared with us that you've been doing this kind of work for over 10 years, is that right?
That's right.
And you've had access to the discovery in this case?
Yes.
And that's well over 30,000 pages, 500 disks, hundreds and hundreds of photos and video clips as well, right?
That's correct.
And you've been in court throughout the trial, am I right?
In and out of court, yes.
And you've heard testimony from various witnesses here and there, in whole or in part, depending on your other duties.
Yes.
With regard to the report, it indicates you and Mr. Lister went up there on October 23rd of 2020, am I right?
That's right, yes.
So not back in 2012.
No.
And fair to say your office was assigned to the case in 2017, is that right?
I believe that's correct, yes.
So after taking the case in 2017, you didn't go up in 17, 18, 19?
I did go up into that region, or Middle Mountain Road, not for the purposes described in this report.
This report was completed October 23rd of 2020.
Correct.
And you talked about a drive time experiment of sorts that you did as part of putting together this map and this report, am I right?
Yes.
So I'd like to just ask you a few questions about that, okay?
Sure.
You and Mr. Lister left the defendant's home and drove 25 miles per hour up Middle Mountain Road.
That's correct. We tried to follow the speed limit the entire way.
So you stay at 25 for the entire time. You're documenting these different times of arrival and departure that we have here.
Yeah, that's correct.
So you're able to drive from the defendant's home to the first remain site in approximately 28 minutes. Is that right?
Correct.
While going 25 miles per hour.
That's correct.
Then you get to the cattle guard at Runlet Park at approximately 43 minutes later, or excuse me, 43 minutes after the departure from the defendant's home.
Correct.
And then you arrive at the OHV route 44 minutes after the departure from the defendant's house.
That's correct, yes.
Where'd you, and I see in your report that you proceeded to park your vehicle. Where'd you park your vehicle?
We parked our vehicle just off to the side of the OHB route that cuts off Middle Mountain Road at that point.
And fair to say you could take the OHV route down to the cranium site, am I right?
I believe so, yes.
Did you do that?
No.
And you could also walk across the field through the grass to get to the cranium site, am I right?
That's correct, yes.
And is that the route you took?
Yes.
And at this point, it's been 44 minutes from the time you left the defendant's house to where you parked your car.
That's correct, yes.
And then you look at your handheld GPS device before you get out of the car, and you see the cranium is 0.06 miles away from the car.
That's correct.
Is it your testimony that it took you 31 minutes to walk that just over a half mile?
Yes, sir.
As you testified on direct, you spent a lot of time outdoors, right?
Yes.
Climbing, rappelling, hiking, fair to say?
Yes.
And it took you 31 minutes just to walk across the grass down the park to get to the cranium site?
It has been.
Just the GPS device you used showed a distance of 0.061 miles from car to cranium site?
Go ahead and answer that.
0.061 miles from where we parked our vehicle to the cranium recovery site.
And then you, after you look at the cranium site, you go back to your car across the field.
That's correct, yes.
You don't use the OHV trail.
No, sir.
And then you drive back down the road, right?
That's correct.
And again, you maintain the speed limit of 25 miles per hour.
Yes.
But your trip down takes only 33 minutes, am I right?
Yes.
So 43 minutes according to your report, or 44 minutes, excuse me, from defendant's house to the top where you parked, and then 33 minutes from the top back down to the defendant's home.
Yes.
Your Honor, if we may, I'm going to ask that Exhibit 223 be put back on the screen. Please do that. And have you seen Exhibit 223 before, Mr. King?
I have, yes.
And does it appear to you that those measurements are fair and accurate with your own experience up on Middle Mountain and Middle Mountain Road?
That does appear accurate.
Take down 223. When you went to the first remain site,
Yes.
did you actually get out of the car and walk down the trail to where the remains were left?
I believe we did stop briefly at that location.
Did you get out of your car and walk down the trail to where the remains were left?
Just down the initial trail to kind of the main point in that location right there.
By main point, do you mean where the ATV trail and the footpath diverge?
That's correct, yes.
Did you then take the footpath to where the remains were left?
I do not believe we did at that time.
But you've done that before, walked to that location?
Yes.
I have nothing further, Mr. King. Thank you.
Any reader? Yes, please, briefly. What, I take it you guys weren't running down the hill, but why did it take a little while to get down the hill? You weren't crab walking or slow walking, were you?
That was our first time going to the cranium recovery site. We were both somewhat unfamiliar with that area. And I think just planning how we were going to reach that location, and we may not have done it in the best possible way at that time.
It's fair to say you've been up there half a dozen times, several times, both not just recreating, but also working on this case.
That's correct, yes.
And tried to replicate, based on the GPS coordinates provided to us by the government, where things were located.
Yes, that's correct.
At both the Runlet Park area and the Bear Eye Park area.
Yes.
And so we were having to rely on what was provided to us.
Are you testifying now?
What did we have to rely on to get to those places?
We relied on material provided to us by the district attorney in this case.
And do you remember what year was the first time you went to the area? I'm sorry, and I don't mean about recreating, I mean for work.
I believe that would have been in 2018.
And then several times thereafter.
Yes.
That's it, thank you.
Any questions from the jury? All right, you can step down. Thank you. Defense?
Your Honor, the defense rests. Thank you.
All right. I know there are a couple rebuttal witnesses. Do we have enough time to do Mr. Rizal before lunch, or would it be better to take a break now? Okay, Mr. Rizal, come on back up. You're still in row. No, I just have blue. What did I do? I have some chambers. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Your Honor. So Lieutenant Nazell, you've testified a few times now, so I'm only going to focus on two specific topics very briefly, okay?
Okay.
It had been mentioned in your testimony at one point that there was a GPS on defendant's truck. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Was there in fact a court-ordered GPS at some point regarding the defendant's trucks?
Yes, there was.
Did his work truck have a GPS?
Yes.
Did he ever use that truck in the context of the case that was relevant?
No.
Did he also have a Chevy truck and a Dodge truck that had a GPS unit on them at some point in time?
Yes.
What were the date ranges of the GPS units on those trucks?
One device was November 29th of 2012 through December 21st of 2012. The second device was on the vehicle from November 29th of 2012 through January 25th of 2013.
So about 2 months?
Yes.
And you said the start date on both of those was November 29th of 2012?
Yes.
So for the first 10 days that Dylan was a missing child, was there any GPS unit on the defendant's vehicles?
No.
And after November 25th, after January 25th of 2013, was there any GPS unit on either of his vehicles?
No.
And that would have included the time frame that Jed Botsford testified when the gate opened for sledders?
Yes.
And that would have included the time that Mike Hall saw him up on Middle Mountain Road on April 23rd of 2013?
Yes.
Those times he did not have a GPS on either vehicle?
Correct.
And I believe from November 19th to November 29th, that 10 days, that's the entire time prior to the search warrant executed in the case. He did not have a GPS on either vehicle either.
Correct.
And then I just wanted to clarify some questions about the searches by Remain Site 1. You remember you testified about a big map that had all the areas that had been searched in the case?
Yes.
And you remember testifying that many of those areas were searched by boots on the ground and line searches, and some of them were also searched by helicopter. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Judge, may I publish 506, Peoples?
Yes.
So, Lieutenant Nazell, you remember testifying about People's Exhibit 506 and the searches done there?
Yes.
Is this pink shaded area in 506, how was that area searched?
That area was searched entirely on foot.
Was that by line searches and grid searches like the jury saw in the photographs?
Yes.
And were other areas on this map also searched?
Yes.
Why aren't those highlighted?
It's basically a different style of search. We're not able to conduct a standard line search or grid search.
Is that just based on the terrain?
Yes.
So then all the other areas were things with ropes and things where you searched those areas, just not with the line search like you did in the pink areas?
Correct.
Between this Remain site up here all the way down to the defendant's home, was that whole area searched?
May I step up to the map?
Yes, you may. Judge, is that?
It's okay. But thank you.
This area through here, all the way down towards Mark Redwine's house was searched. Several locations up into this area here were searched, all by search and rescue personnel. This down here was searched by law enforcement and wildland firefighters.
Let me show one more map. People's 23. Do you know where the Remain site is on this map?
Yes.
Can you show the jury where it is? Okay. And then you see the area down by the defendant's home, and we heard some of that area flattens out, et cetera.
Yes,
Was all that area searched with boots on the ground as well?
yes.
I have no more questions. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Rand, yes. So you're basing your assessment of what was searched there on what other people told you, right?
Not entirely.
You did some of that searching, but you were also having to rely on your personnel, correct?
It was both.
And it was your personnel who put this GPS mark on the bag with the beer can in it that you sent off to CBI, right?
That's correct.
Those folks told you where they searched, and those folks told you the GPS coordinates of that item, right?
I observed from a distance where they were
But
at.
that wasn't the question.
Question's been asked and answered, Your Honor.
I want to,
Hold on. Are you going to switch questions?
I'll withdraw that. Okay.
there was some mention about the GPS units placed on Mr. Redwine's car.
Yes,
Whose responsibility was it to seek further judicial approval for that GPS unit?
was my investigators that were involved in that portion of the investigation.
And neglecting to do that or deciding not to do that, that was based on not having the evidence to back it up, right?
I'm not sure I follow the question.
Law enforcement did not seek any further GPS units being placed on Mr. Redwine's Chevy or Dodge after January 25th, 2013, right?
To my knowledge, we were not able to get any further installation of a GPS device.
That's it. Thank you, sir.
Any reader?
No, thank you, Judge.
Any questions from the jury? Okay, you can step down. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will take our lunch break. We're in the home stretch. You're going to get to go home early or go back to work if you want. You can do that too. In any event, please don't discuss this case either amongst yourselves or with anyone else during this trial. Don't look at social media. Don't keep an open mind. Do keep an open mind. Don't permit any third person to discuss this. Don't talk with anybody, witness, defendant, or lawyer that's involved in the case. Don't gather any information on your own. And we'll start up again at 1 o'clock. Imagine it won't be real long. We will then have to work on instructions, which is outside your presence. And I'll explain what we're going to do then tomorrow. Okay? So with that, everybody rise for the jury. Okay, we'll be in recess. I want one from each side in chambers.